I turned my truck from stainless steel to Ferrari red.
On today's video, I'll be walking you through a DIY pre-cut kit I got to turn my Cybertruck red using paint protection film. And as just a precursor ahead of time, this is not necessarily going to be a how-to video because I do not consider myself an expert on this. In fact, this is the first vehicle I'll ever be wrapping, but you'll get my perspective from somebody who is, sure, a little bit handy, but has no experience doing this. How difficult was this or how easy was it? You'll find out in this video. So now I'm going to make sure I clean the truck really good. I'll be using denatured alcohol. So as is the case with many things like this, whether you're painting or wrapping, covering different things, the detail is in the prep work, and that can actually make or break how your entire project turns out. So I'll be cleaning this off really good with denatured alcohol, and as I'm walking this through in quick motion, I'll explain why I'm using this.
And why I use denatured alcohol specifically is a couple reasons. One, it's really good at breaking down grease, grimes, oils, but also adhesion, which I've had several different stickers on the side of my car, including the ones I made to look like Tron. But also why you'd always use a fuel-based cleaner is it dries extremely fast, which you need for this to be.
So I just laid this first piece out there on top of the truck, just kind of spread it out. So one of the first problems I'm seeing with is they're not labeled, so I don't know what's what, but they're kind of like stuck on these with slight little perforations. So you're just gonna like pull these off, kind of like just stickers on like a sheet of stickers. Okay, so I've rolled out the first two pieces just to kind of see like what's going on. First of all, one is considerably longer than the other. So this first one here, as you can see, it all starts way down here by the end of my truck, but then it goes all the way back down there. So it's probably about every bit of 12, 14 feet long. Then the back one you can see there is really more like maybe 5 foot by 6 foot. And to see these little perforations is pretty difficult. In fact, I don't even know if they're gonna pick up on the camera, but I can see like there's a little line right there walking through. I think you can kind of see it there, that little split, but you have to kind of find those perforations. I considered this earlier, and I think this is what I'm gonna do. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start cutting out all these pieces to be able to lay them all out. And the reason why is because I have this fear, and I don't know why, that I'm gonna be missing a piece. I would hate to like be able to wrap 90% of my truck and not be able to finish because I'm missing something and have to drive around for 2, 3, 4 weeks while I'm figuring that out with the panel missing. So because of that, I'm gonna lay these all out. I just wanna make sure I have all my pieces before I get into it.
So that's what I did. I began to just cut out all these shapes individually because I wanted to, again, just make sure I had everything that I needed. Now, it's really difficult to see the little lines of these. So all said and done, it took me about 20 minutes or so to cut out all these little pieces individually across the 4 big rolls I had. Because again, you can see I had my face pressed 2 or 3 inches from the vinyl the whole time I'm cutting this out. And I'll mention this more at the end of the recap. This would have been so much nicer to do up on a table, but as you can see, the rolls were so much longer than I anticipated. I didn't have anything that large.
Okay, so now I've gotten all the pieces at least roughly cut out. Not exact, just rough enough so I can tell what pieces are what. Just as I said earlier, to make sure I have all the pieces so I'm not having to drive around with a half-wrapped truck. And I do. As you can see behind me here, right there, that's going to make the front. You got the frunk, the 4 doors, those 2 little wheel pieces, the larger pieces that go in the back wheel wells up there, the 2 cantrails on each side, then way back there in the back, you'll see that I got the tailgate, and then all those little pieces way off to the side there are going to go all those little extra places, including the pillars, the tops, all those things. So we're going to jump in and see what we can get done before it gets dark. Okay, anything you watch on DIY wraps will basically use 2 solutions primarily. One they'll call a slip surface that just lets the wrap slide around on the surface of the vehicle. And the second is what's called more of like a stick, a wrap stick. You can buy these both, even Amazon covers these, or you can just make them yourself, which is what I did because everything you read, these are basically just 2 really simple chemical compounds. So that first chemical, the stick, is really nothing but isopropyl alcohol. And all this is gonna do is help it really dry out faster, at least primarily it's gonna help it dry out faster to let it stick, because without any moisture, the wrap is gonna begin to stick to your vehicle. I'm diluting this at about a 20-to-1. I think if anything, you'd probably lean towards less of this rather than more. If you have too much, it's gonna dry too fast and could put you in a bad spot. Now, this second solution, which I'll be using a lot more of, the slip, what everybody recommends you use is some kind of baby shampoo. A lot of things I've seen recommend Johnson & Johnson. Now, this is the Walmart version, so it's gonna tell you that it's comparable to Johnson & Johnson. It's that same slippery soap texture, but it's not gonna have all the suds, which is what makes, a baby cry that's not in this, that might be in something like a dish soap. To me, the biggest difference between this and the Johnson & Johnson is the dilution level. I might just use 1 big squirt of this if I was using a Johnson & Johnson, but the fact that I'm using the off-brand, I'm probably just gonna use 2 big squirts in a bottle like this. Now, I'm not an expert on wrapping in any way, shape, or form of vehicles, but I do know it's gotta be easier to start on the more horizontal surfaces before I go to the vertical. There's really just the one, which is this frunk piece right here. So I'll start with that first because that's mostly flat, just a slight decline.
So as I said earlier, I am no expert in this, but one thing I found out is I almost could not use too much of this slip spray The more you use, the more slick it was. And at the end of the day, you could squeegee it all out anyway, which you'll see throughout this process. But if you didn't have enough of it, it began to stick. And I mean everywhere. If you noticed, I just stuck it to the top of this. I actually stuck it to the car. I'm going to stick it to the bottom of it, in between the two layers, because anywhere you don't have it, it sticks to itself, including to itself. So the more slip spray, the better is at least what I came up with. And I actually found out it was pretty important to spray my hands down also, because my hands would also begin to stick to this somewhat. And again, it's possible I overdid it, but throughout this process, I feel like I never did one time regret having too much. In fact, I was always just thinking, I wish I had more, and occasionally I'd put it on and come back later and add more slip surface when it began to stick. Okay, so once I have this piece all stuck on, I'll eventually come back with the squeegee and start pushing the water out. Now, one thing I do want to point out is this frunk piece is a trial piece that I'll actually be pulling off later, partially to demonstrate how it'll come off. So I'm not too worried about this sizing because I know it's going to come off no matter what. The next piece here is the flat front of the truck below the frunk. Now, the technique I'm using here, I found was probably the best to do all of it, where I just basically did half, again, soaking it with that slip spray throughout, rolling it over, undoing it, and then doing the other half. So very similar to before, I'm going to soak this, get it all out, and then walk to the front and put this on. Now, one thing I found, it was really difficult to find shape and sizes to fit right. For example, I put this on here, then realized it was upside down, where I spun around before eventually stuck this. So in addition to getting it in the right place and size, a couple of challenges I had was, since I was rolling this out on my garage floor, again, because I didn't have a table large enough to deal with this, I kept getting little bits of gravel underneath as I start squeegeeing it down. And a few times I actually had to roll it back and actually find a little point or two and pull them out. Now, that being said, I could still do that. In fact, several times throughout this process, I noticed a little spot where it was lifted, where it got just a tiniest little grain of dirt or dust underneath. I was able to pull it back, remove it, and stick it back down. Now, these corner pieces were a little bit trickier, as you'll see here, because it wasn't just like a square or a rectangle you could lay over half and half, which made it all a little bit trickier to balance out. I wish in hindsight I would have made a table or put two tables together with a little piece of wood or something, because doing it on the ground was really difficult. Okay, so this corner panel, as you'll see here, presented me with the first challenge of this type. Was it was just slightly too small, and this is where I learned I could actually stretch this PPF, but it presented a little bit of challenges, but I'll show you how I figured all that out. First of all, again, I had no idea before doing this how often I could reapply this and how easy that actually was. As you see here, I'm trying to stretch it, where eventually I have to go and get what is that stick solution, which is the whole point of what I got this. You can see here, I'm just putting it on the edge. And what this allows is for me specifically to stretch, and I kind of have to hold it into place. Now, again, if you really want it to hold, I think you could use a higher dilution of that isopropyl alcohol, but using that helped it stick, which allowed me to kind of push off to the other side. Now onto the doors. Now again, these are square, so it's a bit easier to do half at a time, spray it all down. Again, I can't tell you how much it was beneficial and helpful for me to learn just I couldn't put too much of this slip spray. So spray this all down. One thing that was tricky was to figure out which one of these panels went on which door, because they are not universal. They all have to go on their own different panels, because there is just slight dimension and angles. I would do what I'm doing right now differently if next time I had to do it. Is I wasn't 100% sure I had the panels on right. So before I really moved out this one on the left, I did the one on the right. Now the problem with that is the panel on the left started drying now before I could fully smooth the one on the right. So several times I did pull off and kind of reapply a little bit. Another bit of advice I would give somebody else, or I could go back and give myself this, would be clear a block of time large enough for you to do this. I just had like a couple hours here before I knew it was going to be getting dark on me, so I felt a little rushed. And like so many things you do like this, especially that have a little bit of an artistic flair, that you don't want to be rushed, and I felt like I was. We saw there in that previous one, I had to kind of like tuck underneath that little black trim. Some of you had to stretch. You don't want to be rushed at all. Another small bit of advice you notice there on those last two doors and on this one is I smoothed out as much of that water as I could just with my hand. But you do not get it looking nice, not even close, until you actually use the squeegee. These little plastic squeegees, again, that came with it, they're almost like a plastic rubberized squeegee. Whatever those are made out of, they are awesome, and they're really the key to making this all work. And while that front corner panel, and you'll see I have another panel here coming up that was too small, the doors did not have the case. I had plenty of extra, in fact, a lot on either side. Okay, now I just put on this large piece here on the back. Again, smoothing it out with my hand first on the squeegee. This one was a little bit harder to kind of track all down. In fact, I didn't get good camera footage of it, so nonetheless, it all worked out. Again, here's on the other side. Again, I had so many little rocks and pebbles, not big ones, but just tiny ones, which made it a little tricky to put this all out. But again, it was because I was working off the ground. So if I had it over again, I'd find a way to not do that. Same thing I had earlier with this front corner piece. I had to put some of that slip surface and stretch this out, which cool to know that you can always do that. All right, so it had gotten a little bit too dark, so I kind of called it a night. So this is actually the next morning now. And this piece I'm doing here is the tailgate. Again, you can see here, I'm doing this all by myself. So literally spraying it down with the slip surface with one hand while holding it on the other, which let the material kind of bunch up, which take a little bit longer to balance out. And now moving on to this cantrail. This one was pretty difficult. See here my wife with her usual disapproving look of the latest dumb thing I'm doing to my truck. The cantrails were a little tricky. One, figuring out which one went where, which again, if you stick at the wrong spot, I could always remove it. But for whatever reason, it was really difficult for me to get all those little air bubbles out. And again, I kept getting just tiny, tiny bits of little gravel or whatnot that I had to get out. These were a little bit trickier than I was expecting after those gigantic panels actually went easier than I was expecting. So again, here now I'll do the cantrail here on the driver's side. Again, a little difficult to do by yourself. If I had this over again, I would have recruited somebody, even if it was one of my high school boys to kind of help me out doing this, but it was tricky to kind of spray it and do it all, but ultimately it worked out. I was not expecting these next few pieces to come as part of the kit, and really I think this set this apart from so many other kits you have done out there, even professionally, is it came with a ton of little extra parts, all these ones to do all these little pillars and little door push buttons. Obviously you get to cut the little square out of that one. And if you got this kit, you wouldn't have to use those, but it came as part of it, and I just think it looks a lot better with them than without them, but that's just my preference there. I debated putting these on, and eventually I decided to because I just noticed that these little plastic pieces there that almost look like a glass finish were all kind of scratched up on my truck. And in addition, the push buttons had fingerprints on them pretty much all the time, so putting these little pieces on that took care of both of those at the same time. So this last piece here is another thing that I was not expecting and you wouldn't have to do if you didn't want to, but it covers this whole little piece of plastic along the back. And the reason I wasn't expecting this is there's actually a light. There's like a tail light behind this little piece of plastic, but you can see through it as it turns out. It also came with these two little squares that go in the top corners. Again, these cover a light, but I'll show you it doesn't actually affect the light at the nighttime. It actually shines through. Really cool.
So on both sides of my tailgate, I have some significant extra here, which I was going to cut off, but now that I look at it more, I'm going to go ahead and try to wrap it around the edge. Let me show you. Okay, so there it is. Obviously too long, kind of bends over here, but I'm thinking I can wrap it around because you can see there's a good amount of stainless here. So I'm thinking this will wrap and cover in between. So I'm just going to spray some of that isopropyl alcohol all the way down this edge and wrap this around in there.
So I got some more of this stick solution. Again, it's the isopropyl alcohol, sprayed that around, and then just kind of tucked it into place. Now, a couple things I did right, but it could have gone wrong, was I squeegeed out all this little side first. In fact, this is actually several hours, if not the next morning, if I'm right. I actually gave this all time to set up, which is good because if you try to wrap the corner around something and all the water's not out, it'll stay in there and keep it from sealing forever. But I'm glad I took the time to wrap this on the inside. I'm glad I didn't just cut it flush because ultimately it turned out great. And I liked that so much, I went up ahead and did it on the doors. I had extra on the doors. I wanted to open them and wrap them all the way around. So looking good. Now it's just a matter of strapping on all this little plastic, all these little flarings I took off to really get the full effect. Of course, don't forget to hook your cameras back up. Here we go.
Then I got this little light here. So I made a video several months ago that I put this little light bar down in the front center of my, down like below like the frunk area. But I never quite liked how it looked. There are certain times where it actually looked pink at night and not red. And so I never really thought I could do anything about it until I saw how the brake lights actually showed through the vinyl on the back of the truck now. So now I think I'm gonna go ahead and try to wrap this whole thing in red. And hopefully at night, if this goes how I think it will, it'll all be red and just the light will shine through there and actually look more red like the tail lights do than pink.
Okay, so this part, while it wasn't difficult, it was a lot trickier than I was expecting it to be. So first of all, I had to pull off all that old tint, which actually stuck much more stickier like a sticker than this vinyl does. A little bit tricky to get out when I put this on. So I was expecting this to be really quick, really easy because it's so small, right in front of me. I'm at a table, good lighting, everything available. It was trickier. And a couple reasons it was trickier was it had multiple little dimensions in it. And I had only done outside angles a little bit, like wrapping around corners. Inside angles proved to be a lot trickier for me. You'll see at some point I tried to use the heat gun. Ultimately, I felt like the heat gun didn't really help me. It just made it softer to be able to stretch farther, but it was still just a little bit trickier. At least in my little experience here, the vinyl or the PPP, whatever this is, stuck much better to the truck than the actual plastic itself. So as you'll see it here back installed in the vehicle, I think it pulled off the look I was hoping to.
There was one special favor I asked Hansshow, and to their credit, they fully granted it, is I wanted to see if they would give me an extra piece of just one of these little sections, because I thought the question might come up is how easy or how difficult it is to remove this wrap once it's on a vehicle. So I'm gonna rewrap my frunk. So I'll let you see how difficult or how hard it is to pull this piece off the frunk.
Pulling the PPF off a car was actually more difficult than what I was guessing it was going to be, but after I thought about it, it was probably the right level of difficulty. It was hard enough that it wasn't just going to blow off or somebody couldn't vandalize it, pull it off, but yet you could get it off, and what I was worried about, it didn't leave any kind of residue behind.
So for one final recap of the whole process real quick, I'll give you some of the pluses and minuses, and then a recommendation of what I think of this compared to some other finishes I have in my car, including ones like the Rivian here, which I've plasti dipped in the past. If you would all enjoy projects and working on your truck, I had a blast doing this. This was really fun for me, but it was definitely work and took maybe a little bit longer than I expected. I did this over the course of chunks of times in 3 different days, but all said and done, it probably took me about 3.5, 4 hours to totally complete. As you saw just a minute ago, you can remove this if you need to, whether it's to return a lease or you're trying to sell it, trade it in, or if you just have body damage. So some of the cons of this: the pieces are so large, some of them, especially these back ones, they're a little difficult to work with. I mentioned earlier I wish I would have had a table to work off of, but it was really difficult to get a table that big. I guess in hindsight I should have known that. I wasn't expecting the difficulty of working with pieces that large. I mentioned some of these pieces like this corner panel were a little on the small side, but if you're willing to work with it and stretch it, you can absolutely make it work. And as you can see there, I still have really good coverage throughout everywhere. And I mentioned some pieces on the door were actually a little bit too large, which actually in hindsight worked out to my advantage, where I felt like I was able to totally wrap them around those doors to give me better coverage, maybe a little bit more work, but I didn't mind that. Some of the upsides: I thought the quality of the PPF itself was really good. It was as good as anything I could have expected. I think you saw me pull it all off a second ago. It really stretched and gave, which probably did give some of those self-healing properties that it brags of that, to be honest, I was a little skeptical of. I think there's a legitimate chance some of that could work. I was pleasantly surprised how much work time I had, to where it actually made it easier for me to fix some of my mistakes before they became permanent mistakes. As far as the cost, it's hard to beat it. If I want to say it's under $900, maybe even cheaper with some of the discount codes. By the way, I'll leave my channel name down in the description below, which if there's something you want to do, you can get a significant discount off of. The price of this was so inexpensive to many of the other quotes I've received. I haven't seen a quote less than $2,000, but I've seen them all the way up as $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. So even if you're looking at that $2,000 or $3,000 range, you could afford to buy 2 of these, mess it up half of it, and still come out on top. So things I would do different: I would definitely find a way to get this up off the ground and work in a better operation, a better setup off of some kind of a table, even if it was a made table. As I mentioned earlier, I'd get somebody to help me. That could also make the process not only just go faster, but somebody to help me catch little flaws and details here and there. It's really easy to brush out, again, even tiny bits of gravel or even air bubbles, but it sometimes just helps to get a second eye on it. And with that, I did miss a couple little bubbles that I was somewhat able to fix throughout this process, and I missed them because some of the process I was working in poor lighting. In the direct sunlight, it was really easy to see flaws. It started to get dark. I worked way past some of the times I should have, and it caused me not to be able to see some of these imperfections, and I could have done better had I taken my time and done this strictly in daylight or somewhere inside where I also had better lighting. And one of the last really cool things about this kit compared to other ones is it had all these little extra parts. It had these ballards, like you see here and here. It has little lights. Then also it had little things where it covered in the back, which you saw earlier. It covered completely through here, and you could still see your brake lights through it. I thought that was really cool. This kit actually came with additional pieces that I didn't even use. It came with pieces you could use up on the top to do the square of the outside of your truck. Another benefit of the DIY is I have all the little leftover scrap, which I'm gonna be able to do a bunch of different cool little things. By the way, I'm thinking about doing things like blacking out this area, maybe doing some extra little stuff on the rear mirror if I can make it look nice. Subscribe to see that. Of course, I'll do it in the future videos. And I'm actually even wondering if I have enough to potentially maybe do a wheel, like a center hubcap cover, to make this look even gaudier than it already does now. Now, is this a perfect quality? Is it shop quality? No, it's not. As you look closely, you can definitely see flaws. There's dozens of them. They're all over. But at the end of the day, I wanted a red truck, and I do have just that. And I get compliments on it wherever I go. I just have people who are actual professionals or real detail people look at it and notice maybe a flaw here and there. But that was something I was willing to deal with. Again, I am not an expert in this, and certainly if you have somebody who has some more experience in this helping you out, I would recommend it. I think you can knock it out. Really cool product. I couldn't be happier with all it turns out. And by the way, subscribe to the channel because I will be talking tires and these new ones I just got for this beast in the next video. See you in the next one.